Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things Cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, and I'm joined this evening by my other host,
Stu.
How you doing tonight, Stu? You doing all right?
I'm good. It's Friday, recording. It's always a good time.
Friday night's the typical recording night here at UberCube, Casa de Uber. This is when we This is when we relax, sit back, and talk about the favorite thing that we like to talk about and never get to play, Cube.
Well, we got to do something about that. We got to get some more gaming in outside of just the recording.
Be intentional with our Cube play.
Yes.
So tonight's episode is going to be kind of a lessons learned. And as a Cube curator and as a player, there's always a constant evolution. This battle of wits that you have both internally and externally coming from the feedback system within your group and from those outside of your group that you didn't quite expect. And we always preach here how to manage and deal and take constructive criticism. And,
that's right.
And what decisions you should make based on that. And I learned a lot at CubeCon #1.
And we talked a little bit about this while we were pre-gaming, right? And, Anthony has a bunch of cubes and we get to talk about things in our play group, or I would say we get to talk about things at CubeCon with just the volume of players that we don't get to talk about in our little play group. So I'm excited to see how that conversation goes. But let's do what we do. Anthony, what you got for us tonight?
I am having a Voodoo Vice Ranger. We've talked about this on previous shows. This is argumentatively both the smooth criminal or it is Crockett from Miami Vice. To be determined, TBD.
It's Michael Jackson. There's no doubt. It's got the white suit on. It's got the cool hair, cool sunglasses. All right, let's crank it. So, Artifact Cube.
Yep.
That's what we're going to be talking about today. Anthony's infamous Artifact Cube that has been featured at CubeCon, was featured at CubeCon 2022. He's going to be featured at CubeCon 2023. Very excited about that. And the reason why I brought up the whole Playgroup versus CubeCon thing is because I don't know about you guys out there, you curators, if you're fortunate enough to have a group of 8 people that you can cube with every weekend or however many times, and you've got a consistent ability to be able to get not just the play experience with your cube, but also get that feedback for your cube. I just don't know you're incredibly lucky to have that, right? Even us over here at UberCube, with all the people that we have, with all the curators and all the players, we don't really get the opportunity to get 8 players together very often. So CubeCon was a wonderful opportunity to not just get a lot of people to be able to draft the cube, but also for a lot of high-end, real high-quality Magic players to be able to draft the cube. And we're going to talk about the lessons learned. And this is, I think, important. And Anthony, for you as a cube curator, CubeCon was the first time, right? So this was the first time that you'd had a bunch of your cubes that were out there in the big bad world that had been experienced with, again, these high quality players. Tell me a little bit before we really get into this, what that meant to you sort of emotionally when you think about yourself as a curator and how you sort of just viewed it from a 40,000 feet point of view that we always talk about. And you can talk about the Artifact cubes specifically, but with all these players and with this new point of view on your cube.
It's nerve-wracking.
I bet.
It's nerve-wracking because our play group, any play group, you're concealed in a vacuum and your opinions, your meta, are very compartmentalized.
They are.
And even if you have consistent 8 players, you only truly have 7 additional opinions outside of your own.
And not just that, but those 8 players, right, yourself and those 7 players, people... I don't want to say every player is necessarily like this, but you'll have your players that tend to angle towards aggro or angle towards mid-range or angle towards combo, right? So you're kind of dealing with the perspectives of individuals who tend to lean a certain way in their playstyle, and that has to be taken into consideration. But now you get this whole new perspective again from this wider group.
And you don't get that diversity of insight. And that's what happens whenever you open up your cube, as we're going to do in CubeCon 2023, where you're basically exposed. I can't see every line. It's unpredictable, right? I try to think ahead of how a player will interact with a certain card at all levels. But even in my own internal trying to do you remember It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia with Charlie doing the board where he's trying to figure all the possibilities of something. That's how you look, but there's a point where I'm gonna max out, right? I can't see every line.
Magic is complicated.
It's complicated, and not only am I trying to see things through my eyes and how I'll play it, and that creates a certain amount of bias out in that compartmentalized.
For sure.
But then my 7 players, as Stu mentioned, have their strengths and weaknesses, skill sets, time and grade. In our particular circle, Samich, aka Chris Moore, he likes to really test the thresholds of a new deck, and he really likes to do the stuff. He even says it a lot of times. He may not win the match because he's trying to push the jank, if you will, right?
I will give a shout out.
Dynamics.
Yeah,
right?
I'll give a shout out for Chris. I like to do that too. I will sort of see those mechanics that I think, is there support for that in this entire cube? And I'm gonna kind of force that. And I love that. Yeah, Chris is like, he's an experimental player, right? Very, very strong curator and drafter, and just likes to sort of dig into the depths of what the cube has to offer.
We even talked about this recently in our previous episode where I was playing against our good friend Kevin, and I did Nephalia Drown Yard in my horror cube, and I wasn't quite hitting it with the mill episode.
Right.
But I also used Fevered Visions in combination. That line wasn't something I thought of. My brother Josh.
How did that work out for you?
I won because I saw 2 other people do it, but I wouldn't have thought about that. And that's where the lessons learned, because you learn a lot of times. It's not necessarily that the player across the table is better than you.
Sure.
It's that there's always an opportunity to learn. And one of the things that happened in round 1 of CubeCon was, I have watched it ad nauseum at this point, and I'm going to watch it again and again because I'm tweaking and I'm tuning. And that's what this episode's about. But they posted on Cloud Goat Ranger, and it went live, right? And while it was being live broadcast, both Andy Mangold and Justin Parnell were active. Yeah, amazing. They were actively calling out the play-by-plays, right? With Sam Black playing it and others.
Yep.
And they were doing a great job of assessing, but they also, my armor was totally getting pierced because I'm seeing lines of play that I simply hadn't thought of, right? And one of the things that they focused on, and it's true, was the Selesnya package dominated that match.
It did, yeah.
And I never, where in what cube planet? It's oftentimes a joke. Like, Selesnya is a lot of times it's infamous for being almost your bad package in a lot of different, it's the hardest one to bring up. And then now I've kind of adjusted and adapted and said, well, maybe green's my control mechanism. I think Pleasant Kenobi is going to be at 2023. He recently put on Twitter, is there a good green deck in so many words, right? And I responded on Twitter, it was Uberbear's Artifact Cube.
Yes.
But I was kind of I was being self-aware, making a joke towards myself, because my green package has been so aggressive to artifacts. And I want to give some premise to that. I know this is the longest answer to your question on the planet Earth.
No, it's great insight. And I'll continue, please. This is great.
By the development of my cube, and this is where things get kind of mixed up and muddled in the mixture, if you will. My design concept was artifact versus anti-artifact. I'm talking very divisional lines.
Yes. And this was always, if I will, when you first introduced the cube to us, it was, here's the artifact cube, and we played it. And I thought, okay, I expected that to be a big part of the dynamic of the cube, right? You should obviously have a lot of cards that are either artifacts or care about artifacts, and then you'll obviously have a lot of cards that are counter artifacts, either destroy it or prevent it from doing something, right? So that seemed very obvious to me, but that is not, that premise that you just said, anti versus artifacts, that is quite a specific play style and representation of how you should draft a cube like that, rather than, hey, this is an artifact-centric cube, right? Because you think, okay, well, maybe it's got some artifact creatures and you're supporting types of artifact creatures like constructs and, I don't know, whatever other artifact creature types there might be out there.
It goes back to that vacuum. Like, we're trapped, we're encapsulated in our play group. And sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 1v1. We're doing a houseman draft or whatever, a glimpse draft. And we don't always get that level of open feedback, or we're friends, and it sometimes gets a little too sugar-coated amongst our play group. Well, maybe, Chris and I, we'll talk one-on-one privately, but we oftentimes don't announce our criticisms of a cube in front of the group because it's just different, right? But when we got it out there and it's being officiated and called by Andy and Justin, they were calling it real.
Well, they're bigger brains than I will ever be. Let's put that out there.
They see it, right? Yes. Like, think about, there's 2 people boxing and they're calling the fight. They're not giving bias. They're just seeing what they're seeing. And there were some cards they saw. And I'm going on my tangent again before I come to this card. I recently experienced this again because I got another one. I played with Justin Parnell and David McDarby. We joined them at, SCG
It was SCG Richmond.
Richmond. And I heard David McDarby say, "Why is this card in here? It's against the cube." And we're going to talk about that. I heard that, and then finally, there's a point where like we've talked about this before, and May says it too: is call something a horse once and whatever, call something a horse twice, sure, whatever. But if you get called a horse 3 times, there's a good chance you're a horse. Yeah, and I'm stubborn.
You are.
I'm a stubborn individual.
You are stubborn, but you're stubborn in the way of, I like to believe that what I've done as far as the choices that I've made for my cube are the best choices. Sometimes they will be, and sometimes they won't be. And you also are aware enough that players are naturally going to have emotional responses to drafts where they're going to get hosed by a card or two, where they're going to call it out. I remember when I was way early on in my career as a cube player, that I'd play a cube and one card would just absolutely ruin me. And I'd be like, this is nonsense. Get this card out of the cube. It's completely broken. And then I realized, a few drafts later, like, hang on a second, I've got to be a little more subjective here. Got to get a few more drafts under my belt. Got to have a bit more context to be able to put this card in. And that's how you sort of build this diverse opinion of what works and maybe what doesn't.
Yeah, so having CubeCon, where I've got a multitude of players from all...
About as good as it gets.
It is, yeah, it is opening yourself up to... Yeah. And you have to take it, right? But it is your baby. And while I say this a lot of times, and maybe it's not nice, ugly babies do exist. I'm sorry, they do. And you know what? And then, either way, you still protect that baby. You're like, this is not an ugly baby, this is my baby. But still, you know what I mean? Joking aside.
I do.
In this case, when I'm watching them call it, it was so much that I'm feeling the feels watching it getting spectated and called as they call out these next 2 cards. It wasn't the first time it was said to me. I refuse to take or heed my own advice. A lot of times I say, listen to your feedback, and I say all these things. Sure. But in truth, this is a humility episode.
Yeah.
I, too, am guilty of this as well.
So let's get to the first example.
Let's go. Yep.
Do you want me to go on?
Yeah, you do it.
All right, so here's the first one. And bear in mind, obviously, we're talking very specifically about Anthony's Artifact Cube. And this first card is Collector Oof. This is a 1 colorless, 1 green creature Oof. It's a 2/2. Very simply reads, activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. So this is an artifact-centric cube.
It is.
This card sucks.
It does.
If you're on the side of the artifacts and not the anti,
and that's what I thought was happening.
But it's not. This is a very, very polarizing.
It is.
Especially like this is an 8-player cube. It's never going to be so incredibly like pragmatic, if you will, between like each drafter that you're going to have 8 players playing and 4 of them potentially, or 5 and 3, or whatever the split might be, are going to be one side very pro-artifact and the other side very anti-artifact. It just doesn't work out that way. So
it
a card
did
like
in my
that,
head, though.
It did in your head.
It did. It made sense. Like I thought that we would have like this drawn line in the sand, and these 2 armies would just have the perfect swell. They would go against each other in perfect harmony, right? And that's not what happened at all. We went to CubeCon. The reason why Selesnya dominated is because players bigger brains than me thought outside of that diversity of insight that we talk about saw something that I didn't see. Now, this was I was warned about this. I cannot not say that our good friend Chris told me that this card doesn't belong here.
Right.
I'm going to give you my argument. And my argument doesn't stick anymore because at this point I've had enough people tell me it's a horse.
Okay.
Dies to lightning bolt. I mean, jokingly dies to removal. Dies to a braid. I mean,
sure.
Lots of ways to deal with this card.
Do you think that's a bit of a crutch?
It was.
A card can die to lightning bolt or die to fatal push.
Sort of. I also assume that there's a point where you've got enough artifact creatures coming at people that eventually this will become a blocker because you just can't do this anymore. But what I saw happening was people couldn't activate their signets.
Right.
People couldn't equip their equips. You know what I mean? This started equipments. That was a joking. But you see what I'm saying? Like, I just didn't envision that. I just saw it as this is the perfect banner.
You saw it as, here's a hate piece that is going to fit in so perfectly with the anti-artifact side of this cube, whereas it just turned into such a toxic, anti-fun, anti-play card in the draft that... Then this is the feedback that you gave to me, right? And we've talked about it, is that do you really want a card like this in an artifact-centric cube where there's so many artifacts? Like, sure, you can have it in a cube where there's a number of artifacts and potentially this is a good sideboard card, right? Okay, fine. That might work in that environment. But do you really want this in such a heavy artifact-themed cube?
Yeah, I did at the time, right?
Do you now?
No, I don't. I don't, because I do listen to the feedback. So here's my only grief with what we're going to talk about. So humility aside, right? I'm not the most... I'm working on it, guys. But I have to eat a little bit of crow with this. But at the same time, I envision this world of, Terminator versus the humans. That's where all this spawned from, right? And the humans are just simply not going to back the Terminators.
Right.
In so many words. That's what I thought I was doing. That's when I'm trying to envision the thematic design, I was missing the mechanical aspects and the interactions outside of my playgroup.
Yep.
Once this left our meta and got exposed to the ocean of meta of CubeCon, and it will again... Now, you think I was cringe the first time. I'm more cringe the second time, right? Because I've been tuning and tweaking and trying to make my green section, we're going to talk about that, more friendly, more interesting, more interactive, less hate.
Green has got a lot of hate for artifacts. A lot of use for them, a lot of hate. Like, is green maybe I would say undoubtedly green is the most anti-artifact color in Magic.
Red and white are too. Naya in general they have it, but I have been working on that extensively. I have watched this Cloud Goat Ranger. I have listened to both Andy Mangold and Justin Parnell, which they're really good at what they do.
Yes, they are.
And I am paying attention to what their statements were, because they didn't have a dog in the race. And they understand that, right? Like, I'm literally exposing myself as a curator, but that's okay. And I have to sit there and go, I'm sitting there, the meme where the guy's sitting there eating the popcorn, like, oh my God. That was me. But Collector Oath just did not, and this is a focus card. This was the one that I felt like, dies to everything, but suddenly became the menace to society in this cube. Now, There's no way around it. I couldn't do it. It's now been done. And once players heard it, and I heard them talking about it, and we're going to talk about some instances of it, they just ran with it, right? There's nothing. This next card that we've moved on, rip. Let's just rip Collector Oath. It's gone. It's gone. Everybody keep coming through. I am sorry. I had a vision. It's just not going to work. Moving on. This next one, this is the humility portion. And I'm going to explain why. I'm a good Magic player. I'm not the best Magic player. I think I'm a good designer. Obviously not. I like to oof, but you get what I'm saying. I try to do my best.
Sure.
Tower of the Magistrate. It's a land. I'm sure there's something here as far as Oracle text that I totally missed. I apologize.
Yep.
But tap, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, or pay 1, tap, target creature gains protection from artifacts until the end of the turn. I want to explain what I saw in my vision when I added this card, and then what it became again at CubeCon.
Okay.
Right? For me, this was either I'm going to give some artifact creature, I'm going to give some creature, I'm going to bolster it and allow it to break through the line.
Sure.
And tag you.
Put some equipment on it, maybe. Put whatever. Make it big. Make it beefy.
Yeah, except they'd fall off, and I didn't think about that. None of that happened. That protection thing, it's so funny for a person that's been doing this for a long time, is just like whenever someone goes to put Rancor on a creature and you remove it in response, that's how you deal with the Rancor, right?
Correct.
Never once did my mind, for whatever reason, think, oh, they're going to spend all this time paying 2 to put some version or iteration of a sword or whatever in a cube environment just to have someone pay 1 and have them all fall off.
Correct.
I don't know why I never thought of that. But I'm sitting there watching it live on Cloud Goat Ranger and other people playing it, and I'm scratching my head going, oh man, I totally missed that. I didn't think about it. I'll be honest, this is the humility episode. I'm just putting myself out there in the world. I didn't catch that. I don't know why I didn't catch it.
I don't think that's...
I used it for defensive and
Listen,
attack.
I don't think it's unreasonable. I think for the most part, and I'll go right along with you. When I look at protection, I look at it as, hey, my opponent's playing a white deck. I'm playing a green deck, just as an example. I would love to be able to give my creature protection from white that I've put a Rancor on as an example, and I've swung through for the last few points of damage. That's great. Like, that seems, it might be a very linear way of looking at it, but it's certainly not an unreasonable way of looking at it. But you're not looking at it from what does my one creature do with my handful of enchantments in my deck? And what am I playing against on my opponent's side? Now you've got to look at it from the scope of the entire list of cube. It's not 60 cards versus 60 cards or even 40 versus 40. It's an entire 360 card environment. And like you say, Now you've got protection from artifacts. Oh, what's that? You're trying to swing through with your swords and, your nettle cysts and
they all fall
whatever
off.
else.
And
And they're all gone.
I didn't think about it. So I thought of this as more of a defensive attack mechanism. I did think very linear this is gone too, by the way.
Really sucks when you do it on like a nettle cyst.
This was my
a Caldra complete,
which is
as
also
an example,
also gone
because now it dies, and
Yeah.
and maybe they don't even have a creature to attach to.
Yeah, there's
Yikes.
lessons learned, right? So this is a card. I mean, to be honest, I just hadn't seen that line. I don't know why I didn't think of it. I just put it in there. We're gonna go down to our next cards. This is it's just putting it out there to the universe. I'm learning as we're learning. Here's the one that has sparked the conversation, the reason why we're talking about this. And there's a little bit more layers to this. But Stu, would you mind taking this card on?
So this is one that I love this discussion on. All right. And I'll tell you why after I introduce the card. So this is Kataki, War's Wage. It's a 1 colorless, 1 white legendary creature spirit. It's a 2/1, and it has all artifacts have, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this artifact unless you pay 1. I'm going to say this. When I first saw this card in your list, I actually thought this was a pretty fair card. And the reason why is very simple. I thought, okay, I am going to, if I'm playing an artifact kind of deck, I like the fact that I will sort of have a stretch towards, a curve towards sort of my big payoffs. And eventually, I don't mind maybe getting to the point where I've got 1 or maybe 2 sort of big, powerful artifacts. And you know what? Paying a couple of mana for them isn't a huge deal, right? If you've got a Blightsteel Colossus or, Wormcoil Engine.
Not in the
or
cube. The second one
it's
is, yes.
Or Wormcoil Engine. That's maybe a great
better
example.
Or,
and even that, there might be times where you might want to purposely not pay. But I think about cards like that. I don't mind paying 1 mana to keep that alive. And maybe I have a little bit of flexibility, and I don't know if that's something that you've ever thought about when you put this card in, but I think about, okay, I'm making my big play. Maybe I've had to be careful in the earlier parts of the game, but that's like a payoff. But it just doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't. I want to see it through one lens, but other people see it through another.
Because it's a 2 mana, and it's not even a 2 pip. It's a 1 colorless, 1 white, and it immediately becomes incredibly toxic on the environment, because now it's something that has to be dealt with, especially, and again, you're talking about this through the lens of an artifact-centric cube, and now you've got a tax on all of your artifacts, and that can get very, very difficult very, very quickly, and that can produce, I don't want to play this game anymore.
And I have cut it, and it's a different way of looking at it. I saw it from the symmetry of all.
Sure.
I saw it from 2/1, not a great attacker, sometimes become a blocker. Kind of falls in that oof kind of idea where I thought eventually they're going to concede and they're going to have to block, and we're going to talk about that. But you know what? If I'm having to force those decisions and that different thought tree as I move through stuff, then other players are seeing it too. And you're right, I'm going to have to. I really don't want to wash away or erode. That's my biggest fear as a curator, is I still want that divisional line. I still want that statement of anti versus artifact.
Right.
That's what I designed.
This is extreme, though.
It's extreme.
And it's very cheap. It's not like this is some 5 or 6 mana play where you're really making things difficult for your opponent. This is a 2 mana, very, very easy to cast. And potentially, if you're sort of really sticking hard with that anti-artifact theme, all of a sudden you're really hosing your opponent hard.
Yeah, you get this and the oof, and you just start, and it starts compounding. And frankly, in my vision, I didn't see it that way.
Sure.
Nor in our meta did I see it that way. But again, when I went inside that group of just amazing players at CubeCon, which is CubeCon 23, I exposed all of my defaults with this cube.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's actually the best part of what happened, even though I had to eat crow, as you will, right? Is I learned something here. As I'm watching it live, I'm like, oh God. So I replaced it with something. I actually put a thing, the whole conversation starter was, and I kind of, this is a secondary conversation, but I put it up in our Discord and I put it up in others, but I replaced it with recommission, and I asked Kataki versus recommission, which one would you rather see? And, everybody kind of said, if I want to win, it's Kataki, which is signaling if I want to win without having to try really hard. Is what they're
Sure.
saying. It's a bit of sarcasm embedded in that idea.
Yeah.
And then also, I neither care or love that this is in the list, are signals that other players see it a different way. So I went with recommission. For 1 colorless and a plains, you get a sorcery. Turn target artifact or creature or mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If a creature card enters the battlefield this way, it enters with an additional 1/1 counter on it. This plays into modular, kind of does that light kind of stuff that my Reanimer package wants to do, etc. So it's a good thing. I want to talk about all this summarized, right? We've got a good friend, Derek Gallen, known as Magical Hack in our Discord.
Love Derek.
And when I put this up there and I put Kataki versus Recommission, and I jokingly put up there, I already know the answer to my question. It was very rhetorical, but I just wanted to see if I was at this point on mark. And he made it very real and in a lovingly way, as Derek does. Here's what Magical Hack, aka Derek Gallen, said. Putting this in your artifact cube is like putting Blood Moon in my cube. You tell the drafters they can and should do a thing, and then you go out of your way to exclusively punish the very thing you promised would be fun.
That statement right there, I think there's so many curators that could probably just read that and think, are there cards in my cube that I've put in for the very purpose of just hating so much of the theme of this cube that it's just going to be anti-fun, anti-theme of the cube. Like, I understand that you definitely want to have pieces in your cube to just prevent, certain archetypes running wild, right? And this is an artifact cube, so it stands to reason that you would want to have pieces in your cube that are going to prevent, like, just people going wild with artifacts. But it's a little too much.
And I didn't see it that way, but thank you, Derek. It is solidified. He continued with this guy's a wordsmith.
He's a savant.
He is.
He's a savant and a wordsmith.
I believe Magic is a better game when each player has more available game actions per turn. Early Magic was dominated by cards that exclusively reduced agency game actions. If we're all stopping each other from playing the game states are navigated by inertia, the lack of playing Magic. What game are we then playing?
Yeah, so nicely put.
As a competitive person, Kataki appeals to my willingness. Thank you, Derek. To do whatever is necessary to win attitude. Again, thank you, Derek. As a game designer, Kataki is a bad card, with sometimes it being completely game warping. That is not a range that prioritizes fun gameplay.
And we've talked about where is the fun, right? Where is the fun in your cube?
I don't know. I'm still looking for it. It's like the Goonies are seeking it out, and we're still looking for it. We're going to find out CubeCon 2023 where the fun is, I suppose.
I am excited. This is one thing, because we've talked a bit about your artifact cube. We've talked a lot about this cube in our previous episodes. It's a very complex cube. There's so much to do, so many interactions, so many archetypes. I'm excited to see where the changes that you've made, especially with cards like this, how they lead to more fun and more interactive games with this cube moving forward. Again, this is 2023. We've got CubeCon coming up. Let's see how this kind of feedback leads to just a more fun cube.
Here's some more from the great Magical Hack, a.k.a.
Derek
Gallen. If I remember, you also had Collector Oof in the cube last year. I'm really happy to see that go. It's in a very similar class of card to Kataki, where it punishes the thing you promised me I should do. I think my finals opponent was green and white, Artifact Hate, and I won because I could still attack through all the locked pieces.
Yeah.
That last statement, though, that was what I hung. That was the.
Did that kind of make you pause just for a second?
That little tail end, the little meme with the frog holding onto the stork's tongue. That end part was what I thought would happen, is that the attacks would go through. With the Kataki and with the Oof being like a 2/2 and a 2/1, whatever, I assume there's a point where they would just become latent and no one would care. They would eventually become speed bumps.
Exactly.
That's what I thought would happen.
That's what I was referring to earlier, where you think, okay, if I can somehow get my larger pieces through, Kataki's a very hateful piece, but it's still only a 2/2, right, on the field. If you're sort of reducing it down to the I want to swing with creatures and win through combat damage, which it's not all of the cube, but a lot of the cube, you're probably going to see wins where it's going to be creatures turning sideways, right? So that's where you sort of look at these kind of cards and think, where do they fit in with that, preventing someone just going and running rampant and turning creatures sideways, especially larger creatures? And if you have hate pieces like that can slow the game down enough for the other archetypes to shine, okay, great. I think that's a good position for cards like that. But if it just creates an unfun experience for the entirety of the cube or for anyone that drafts it, that's where, the question marks need to come in.
Which leads us to actually the source of the conversation. This past weekend, when I went and hung out with my little brother, we did some 1v1 glimpse drafting, chaos drafting, whatever, with the artifact cube. We had a good time. And then we had some open. He has no, again, dog in the race.
Sure.
My brother's very straightforward. I ask him a question, he's going to answer whether I like it or not.
Yep.
And I just I had thoughts, it's, whenever you have, you don't want to hear the answer, but you're going to present it all the same, kind of like that's how it felt. And I asked him not only about the 2 cards, we talked about Oath being gone, but Kataki came up, but then the Tel Jalad, the whole group of them in there.
Right.
And I run 3 of them, and I'm going to explain what they are. It's Tel Jalad the Chosen, which is protection from artifacts. The whole group, it's a 2/1. Tel Jalad the Archers is a 5-mana green card for a 2/4 protection from artifacts, and it can block flyers. Or a Tel Jalad Outrider, which is also a 4-mana value, 3/1 protection from artifacts. And he put it to me straight. These cards are boring.
Yes.
They just were boring. And I was really using those as my bannermen to signal the anti-artifact faction.
Right.
Along with the others.
These can be incredible if you're sitting across from someone who is exclusively playing artifacts. Works great. Is that how you want your cube to go?
No. Again, I want to go back to that thin red line that I drew down the middle. I did literally the parallel, and I said, this is this team, this is that team. So I've gutted them and removed them. And it's funny that it took me so long to remove those, but many moons ago, I removed Angelic Curator for 1 colorless and 1 plains. You get an Angel Spirit 1/1, flying protection from artifacts. I don't know why I saw that card as a threat. I don't know, 5 years ago. But the Tel Jalad, they hung out forever. They've been literally just got rid of them 2 days ago at the time of us recording this, which is interesting. And I think it was just me being stubborn, pig-headed, thinking they signaled a faction that said, we are the anti-artifact group. This is what we do. And whatever reason, right? And this is my boy Oaf, and this is my boy Kataki. And I don't know where my brain space was, but I just thought that would be like one player would have that and the others wouldn't, and they would manage the team.
I'll offer something. Maybe you're like, this is a flyer, and flyers are typically very, very powerful in thematic cubes, right? We've played enough cube drafting, and outside of the vintage cube, we've done enough with all of our yours and sandwiches and Christian and so on and so forth. Flyers are very, very powerful. This is a flyer. It's only a 1/1. It has protection going all the way back to that beauty of a land back there. It has protection from artifacts. You can't equip a sword to it. You can't equip anything to it that's an artifact, because it'll just, you can't. So it's a 1/1. What do you really do with this card?
Pretty linear, but I saw that one early on. I'm not quite sure why I let the other group, just because they were Tel Jalad. They sounded awesome. I don't know why I let them hang out longer than I did, but this is just something we learn as curators, right? We are constantly evolving, and I'm meticulously combing through this cube right now as we speak, trying to figure out how can I make green and white less threatening to the artifacts, more supportive, but a nice little blend, right? I'm trying to get a nice blend. And it's very difficult, and there's not a lot of us.
Yeah, that card is a Scryfall Advanced Search, protection from artifacts. Okay, Angelic Curator flying. Okay, that goes in the cube.
That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. Yeah, that's about how it played out. In the way back when. That's what I did it.
That's fair.
These next 2, I'm going to let Stu take on. These are more lessons learned, but they plug in this. We've talked about this before. There's nothing new, but it's nice to talk about, I've accepted these 2 and the logic behind them. Some of them just took me longer to learn.
Any kind of repetitive, consistent value that is just so difficult to either deal with or get around, to me, is just, it can be wonderful or it can be atrocious. And the first one, this is Trigon Predator, 1 colorless, green-blue, creature beast. It's a 2/3 flyer. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment that player controls. I will say that I went up against this card on a number of occasions. And I like my repetitive value in certain situations. I think there's a place for being able to consistently do something over and over again in an artifact-centric cube like this, where someone literally plays 3 mana and then just gets to destroy your permanents every single turn unless you can deal with it. And this, again, it's a 3 toughness. Is there a lightning bolt in this cube?
Yes. Well, so that's...
Is there a braid in this cube?
Yes.
Yes, there is.
But they're both red.
You've got some...
Which leads me... So I'm trying to see all the lines, right? So I put Trigon Predator in there. And I'm trying to predict, like, what colors can deal with this and what not. So this is Simic in this case. So I'm assuming even black in their deck could deal with it. The one that has white, the one that has white can deal with it to a degree, and the one that has red that can deal with it. The blue could do counter magic, and the one with green, they're not going to be having artifacts anyway in my vision. That's the problem with the vision.
But it just didn't work out like that. It
didn't work out the way right. I thought there'd be, again, that thin red line, right? Sure. It didn't happen the way that I envisioned in the design. Now it's kind of the lines blurred so rapidly because people will run stuff. And I'm encouraging it with something like Trigon Predator when you're in Simic. I would assume that you would choose I literally say it in my preamble to my cube is choose a side. But do you really? You kind of, because the way it works out is you're quite all right with running a Trigon Predator if it were there still, and you'll run a Wormcoil Engine, and they don't like each other. They're not friends. They're going to go to the bar together, but they'll be in the same deck.
They work
because
very
they'll crush
nicely.
souls together.
Yes, they will.
And that's what I didn't think about. I thought about people would literally have these rigid lines. That was the mistakes that got exposed during CubeCon. The next one, would you mind taking on this one again? Because it happened, and I did this to myself.
Oh my gosh, this card. Okay.
Blame my brother Josh, who also gave me the wisdom for the others, caused this to happen.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so this is Kappa Cannoneer, 5 colorless, 1 blue for an artifact creature, Turtle Warrior. This has Improvise. It's a 4/4. It has whenever an artifact enters the battlefield or under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Kappa Cannoneer, and it can't be blocked this turn. That by itself would make this card very, very powerful.
It enters as a 5/5.
It
triggers itself. Yeah, it does that. It's gross.
Right. But it has Ward 4, which is basically hexproof, right? So now you've got essentially a 5/5 hexproof just monster of a creature that comes. This isn't even a card that you need to do a whole lot to make it effective, and it just becomes so obnoxious. And I'm going to equate this with another card that I'm going to talk about in a second. But especially in any kind of lower power environment, cards that just are immediately, if this enters, it's going to win the game. It's a huge headache. The entire game is warped around this one single card. I understand that this is not a cheap card to play, right? Kappa Cannoneer is 6 mana. But it does have Improvise. And that basically means it's a 2 or 3 or maybe 4 mana card. If it didn't have that, would you be as worried? I allowed myself
to be convinced by a Commander player.
Yes. Well, there's your first mistake. But the fact that you get this out early and immediately this comes out, it's going to win the game. The ward by itself is just obnoxious. It just grows very, very large, very, very quickly. Ward 4, like you said, it might as well be hexproof. And it just, like I said, any card like that can just take over the game so quickly, the flags come out immediately.
And the sake of being repetitive, because both these cards we've talked about on multiple occasions. So I do apologize for that. But the joke is, not only am I saying these are my lessons learned, but in addition to, I talked about it before, I beat Uberbear at Uberbear's Cube. That is going to be like a meme that I have forever burned into my soul, having that said. And it was from Kappa Cannoneer. Which leads me to my next card. This is a recent cut that I made. And I don't know if this is a good cut, but I made the decision. I decided enough's enough. And that was Lightning Greaves. And for people who aren't familiar with Lightning Greaves, it is for 2 colors. Get an artifact equipment. Equipped creature has haste and shroud. Equip 0.
Obnoxious card.
I'm trying to see forward and thinking like...
I don't like this card. And I'm going to be very, very honest. I've cut this card. This is, to me, because it's been in a lot of the EDH pre-cons. At first I was like, oh, that's really cool. I get to put Shroud on, I'd less worry about like enchanting my own creatures. I'm just looking at it more, I would imagine a lot of people are, as a protective spell. I have really started to dislike anything that prevents interaction. I will say that.
Yep.
Be it Cube, be it EDH, be it any format, I think that aspect of Magic, that you've got that interaction between players, between permanents, between spells, whatever, is so, so critical. And every time that comes out, it's always now I've got to deal with that. And then I've got to deal with another card. In EDH, okay, maybe not so much of a problem because, someone else can maybe have the artifact destruction spell in their hand and someone else can deal with the creature. But now you've got two spells that need to go towards just getting rid of one permanent. And that's, sometimes can be a little bit problematic. But to me, just the fact that it reduces interaction is enough for me to say, even in an artifact-centric cube where you do have a lot of cards that are anti-artifact, I dislike it. I dislike the anti-interactive aspects of it. And like I said, I'm taking it out of a lot of my commander decks because I would rather open myself up to the interaction and have that be part of the game and to speed up the game, if you will, than it just be just a 2-mana equip 0. You just get to move it around at will. It's obnoxious.
Which kind of leads me to one of the lessons learned that I had personally as a curator, is to make things, frankly, more vulnerable to interaction.
Yeah, I think that's
vulnerable
important.
is the word. And this card actually, what would happen is the equipment. So last CubeCon, both Selesnya and equipment decks dominated. And I really I'm over there struggling with my Red Sacrifice, which I've bolstered up since. And I want to see more control aspects evolve. But I saw people gravitating a lot more to those two type of archetypes that I want to see a little bit more evolve out of this cube. The next one, Stu, would you mind taking on this one? Because this is an interesting one. This one got cut too. By the way, FYI, as we discuss these cards have been removed as the lessons learned.
Yeah, so this shouldn't need any introduction. So this is Caldra Complete. 7 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. Living weapon. Indestructible. Equipped creature gets +5/+5 and has First Strike, Trample, Indestructible, Haste, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a creature, exile that creature. Equip 7. I will say, every single time, this creature or this card entered the battlefield, it was the end of the game. Mm-hmm. It ended the game by itself.
I didn't expect that. I don't know how.
I don't know how either.
I think it was because it's new and it's flashy.
That's to be understood either. You want the cool new cards.
I wanted the cool new cards.
Yeah, and it's from Modern Horizons 2, right?
It was like, I want to be cool. When I come to CubeCon, I'm like, oh man, he's representing, he's got culture. But at the end of the day, like literally, I probably made people's games miserable.
So let me ask you this, right?
I don't have an excuse for this card. I feel really bad.
This is interesting for me, and I'll ask you this question. Mm-hmm. You looked at this and you were like, I want this in my cube because maybe it represents the top of the sort of the curve and the power level that you want for the people on the artifacts.
I wanted to be flat. I wanted to be powerful.
So let's talk about Oko.
Well, it's not in here.
It's not. Was it ever? Was it ever under consideration?
No. Why would it ever be? No.
Because it's an answer. It's a great answer for Caldra.
Well, I actually have a better answer since you got off that.
No,
thing.
you don't.
I do, in fact.
No, you don't.
Cast into the fire for 1 colorless and 1 red. You get an instant. This came out in Lord of the Rings, by the way. You can choose one. Cast into the fire deals 1 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures, or you can exile target artifact. When I made this, when I added this to Uberbear's artifact cube, well, Cast in the fire did not exist. I don't know where my headspace was when I added this card. I assumed that people could sweep the legs from the creature, path to exiles, etc. But at the end of the day, this was a really bad... I mean, I'll just own it. This was a poor choice on my part. I was thinking that actually I wanted games to end and that this card would actually bring them to their grand finale. So these are the kind of the cards I kind of want to recap on the names of the cards briefly and kind of say where we went. We started out with, I watched the Cloud Goat Ranger on the YouTube series where I'll post up into the show notes. But as we talked about, my lessons learned watching them live outside of my meta, outside of my group, Collector Oath, Tower of the Magistrate, Kataki, Tel Jad the Chosen, Tel Jad the Archers, Tel Jad Outrider, Trigon Predator, Kappa Cannoneer, Lightning Greaves, and Cauldron Complete. If everybody can do a moment of silence for them because they've all been pulled out. of Uber Bears artifact. You will have to see them in
I
2020.
don't want to give a moment of silence.
No,
I'm glad to see the back of them. Goodbye, you will not be missed.
So these are the lessons I've learned. So what did I do to make it better? Well, I'm not going to be able to cover all the artifacts, but I'm going to talk about some new additions I did, specifically focusing on green. Stu, would you mind taking on this first one? It's fun. I like it. I'll explain why it's in here.
So the first one is Kappa Tech Wrecker. So first of all, the name is incredible. Mm-hmm. It's a 1 colorless, 1 green creature turtle ninja, and the type is amazing as well. Has ninjutsu, 1 colorless and 1 green. When it enters the battlefield with a death touch counter on it, whenever Kappa Tech Wrecker deals combat damage to a player, you may remove a death touch counter from it when you do exile target artifact or enchantment that player controls. Again, what do we dislike? Constant, repetitive, ludicrous value. What does this have? A single use on a very fairly costed creature that's awesome, has a great art, is a ninja. What's the not to love?
Well, if they keep connecting with a 1/3, that's there's a point where I'm going to say that's on you. This creature,
well, they can't. It only has one.
It has the ninjutsu. It gets in there. What I thought could happen in this, I'm thinking this is.
Are you trying to bounce it?
Yeah, I'm gonna bounce another card.
Okay.
I'm gonna bounce like a Rex Sage or something. I'm thinking this is more of a centric card that people can have a good time with.
Okay.
And the art's great. I could be wrong here.
Sure.
But we'll give it a whirl. We'll see how that feels. I think that's a fair Magic card that does the exile thing.
I think it's a very, very fair card. I think just having the ability to only exile 1, I think it's a great card, great flavor. Just having the 1 ability on a 1/3 is, it's only dealing 1 damage. It does have the death touch, but you may remove the 1 death touch counter. So it's, it is a may, and you only get to do it once.
It's a turn and burn. So
yes.
it's interesting. I think it does what you need it to do, and then it's done, and after that you just have fun.
But this next one,
yep.
Anthony, you showed me this.
I'm a fan.
I'm so excited. Tell us about this one.
Kodama of the West Tree for 2 colorless and 1 force. You get a legendary creature spirit, 3/3. It's reach. Modified creatures you control have trample. Modified is equipment, auras you control, and counters are modifications. Whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. What I do like about this card is it plays interesting. Right now, modular is kind of a Boros thing type of situation. This really pulls it into a Naya and gives green a different access point to the artifact world.
Was there some ramp? As far as in the artifact, so how much was that considered as part of like an addition to the rampy kind of package?
That's what I liked. It plays in. I can't think. It's sort of the animist is what it kind of gives that feel, right?
Yep.
But it makes your creatures do that too. I'm a fan, and it has reach, which is a big deal. So this card actually is a nice little build around, and I think it solves some of those problems. And so I've cut. Like I said, the Child Jalad, I've cut them so that they've now got a better replacement.
Very
so a bit
cool.
more friendly.
Very
next one's actually kind of cool. Would you mind taking this one on, Stu?
This is Galadrim Bow. This is a 2 colorless, 1 green artifact equipment. Has flash. I love me some flash. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control, untap that creature, and equipped creature gets +1/+2 and has reach, and it has equipped 2. This is super cool, man. It acts as all kinds of things. It acts as a combat trick, acts as, hey, I just want to maybe squeeze a little bit of extra damage in. I think cards like this are super cool, not overpowered, has great utility. I do love cards like this that are kind of a bit on the, I want to hold some mana up. I'm mono green. Why are you holding?
Creates weird tension in mono green.
Why are you holding mana up as a mono green if you've got cards in your hand?
I think it's fun. Cool. It's a new edition. It came out in Lord of the Rings. Yeah. I kind of missed it on my first glance, but whenever I was trying to cut the different, the bad cards. Awesome. I think this is more interesting. It gives green a different type of vibe.
Yeah.
So let's kind of do my holdout. And I think this was justifiable. As we said, all these lessons learned, but I cut all the punishing creatures, the oafs and whatever. The hum of the Radix. I think I'm going to leave this one, Stu. For 2 colorless and 2 forests, you get an enchantment. Each artifact spell costs 1 more to play for each artifact its controller controls.
This, I think...
Greed limiting in my mind.
Possibly. But again, I have not drafted this card, so I can't comment on it. But I will say, I would be very interested to see how this works in a very, very highly anti-artifact green environment. It is 4 mana, which is not cheap. I would love to be able to ramp this out in I want to get my artifacts out quickly and then be able to get this out and kind of tax you. So it is kind of toxic in a way, because it is taxing in a perpetual way. But I think the fact that it costs 4, and I think that it only is taxing you for 1 per artifact, maybe that's not too much of a red flag for me right now. But I think I would put this on a bit of a watch list.
It's on a watch list, but I'm running all the rec sages you could imagine, etc.
Sure.
So I gotta have something that keeps that. But on the other side of the spectrum, right? And this one's always just kind of slipped under the reins. Meanwhile, we're all talking about, please don't tax
me, bro.
Don't tax my artifacts, bro. But then Lodestone Golem for 4 colorless and 5. It's a 5/3 artifact golem. Non-artifact spells cost 1 more to cast. Never came up as a complaint. Why is that?
That's because it's only costs 1 more to cast for your non-artifact spells, and Hum of the Radix is 1 more to play for each artifact. The two are not really very comparable, in my opinion.
I don't know if I learned any lessons in this episode. Was this fun, though? Did you have a good time?
It was great.
Yeah, so we're moving to final thoughts. So what we kind of talked about is lessons learned. It's just something you have to adapt as you...
Correct.
And when you go outside of your sphere, outside of your meta, outside of your group, there's an opportunity, such as CubeCon, to probably expose some of the faults and also the positive aspects.
To a larger group.
To a larger group.
Yeah.
To a different diversity of insight, if you will, right?
Strong
it's
players.
A big deal. And they're going to give you feedback, and you have to be willing to accept it. And it's considered a learning opportunity.
Exactly.
Right? Even though, Crow doesn't taste that great, we'll still do it together, right? That's what we do. All right. So got a couple of announcements here that are pretty important. I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. UberCube is very proud to be partnering with The Gathering Place for an Extra Life convention, August the 18th to the 20th, where we will be there on the 19th and 20th. And Uberbear's Artifact Cube, Uberbear's Horror Cube, and then those will be on the 19th, and then on the 20th, Uberbear's Two-Headed Giant Cube. So many words, right? Uberbear, awesome. Everything, right? But anyways, we're going to be featuring this. Obviously, very small opportunity there because they can only support 8 players.
Sure.
I'm going to bring extra cubes, but it's a good opportunity for us to break into this modern 10K, this RCQ slot, these legacy 5Ks. I'm going to go in there and show you, hey, have you guys played Cube?
This is a huge event.
It's a huge event.
For, obviously, as Anthony just mentioned, lots of different formats, modern, legacy, pioneer, and vintage, and old school, and pioneer, all supported. And the best thing about this is it's in support of the Children's Miracle Network. Obviously, I have children. Anthony, we're all about the kids. So to be able to be supportive of an event like this is such a great thing. We're very proud to be able to support this event. There's also going to be some artists at this event. Ken Meyer Jr., Rob Alexander is going to be there. There's going to be vendors. I'm super excited. I love these any kind of events, right, where you got a bunch of people together and can hang out and play Magic and talk about Magic is going to be cool. But this is all that as well as supporting a great cause. So if you're in the area or feel like traveling on that weekend of August 19th to 20th, come down and hang out and maybe cube with some people.
Yeah, come find us. Not cube centric, but I'll have them all loaded up in the truck. We'll figure out something. We're gonna avert these. Another thing too, you may have seen actually on our Buzzsprout account is there is a donate button. So if you want to support the show, please check that out. And if you love the show, we would truly appreciate a 5-star review on your favorite player. We are an affiliate with Alter Sleeves. Use our code for 5% off your purchase. It's basically altersleeves.com/UberCube. Can't speak well enough about this group. I absolutely love everything they do.
Yep.
And if you want to support the show, please use our Inked Gaming affiliate link where you can get your playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, etc. And if you want to get those custom mats going for CubeCon, even though we're getting those sweet CubeCon mats with UberCube on them, by the way. Which
That's
is
pretty
dope. You can do that. It's pretty good stuff. Actually, I ordered most of my stuff. I got the nice stitching and all that. I'm very
cool.
And you can find us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod. You can reach us at UberCubeMTGPodcast at gmail.com. If you want to send us any kind of questions or whatever, you can reach out to us. We'd be glad to respond to them on a smaller level. And we would love if everyone, the whole world,
come hang out with us on Discord.
Come hang out with us in Discord.
Come hang out on Discord.
Yeah, UberCube has a Discord. If you're interested, please hit us up. I'll shoot you a link, or you can find us at #UberCube. And we have a Patreon. Stu, tell us about Patreon.
So, without further ado, we're going to get to what we always say at the end of these episodes.
Happy cubing!